G'day, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the second series of the History in the Bible podcast. More of the history in more of the books in all the Bibles. Episode 2.26 Christianity's Earliest Witness. In the last episode of the History in the Bible, I explored the modern state of New Testament scholarship. In this episode, I tell the tale of the very first document that attests to Christianity, Paul's first letter to the Thessalonian Jesus Club. In this vignette, I am going to use unusual English translations of some of the Greek words used by Paul. According to scholarship I have consulted, my translations better render the understanding of a pagan Greek of Paul's time. Now, I don't actually know any ancient Greek and am relying on academic sources. If I have it wrong, email them, not me. The scene is the city of Thessalonica. Today, it is the second largest city in Greece. Thessalonica was the capital of the Roman province of Macedonia and a prosperous trading hub, bestriding a major east-west highway. About 4 days' journey from Corinth or Athens, 10 days from Jerusalem, and 17 days from Rome. The city is a favourite of the Romans, enjoying freedom from taxation and unfettered self-governance. The only Roman troops in the city are the governor's dozen or so bodyguards. You could not ask for a better place to live in the early Roman Empire than Thessalonica. The year is 52. Jesus was crucified 2 decades ago. In that time, his followers have been active in the Eastern Mediterranean, spreading the good news about this amazing man. They have established little clubs in cities throughout the Greek-speaking East. You are a pagan Greek in good standing. Apollo is your favourite superhero. You never miss one of his plays at the Odeon. You've been invited to one of the evening club get-togethers by your Jewish friend Simon, a colleague in your leather workshop. The club meets in the house of Aristarchus. The club was founded by some Jewish guy called Paul a few years ago. That's odd. Paul is a Roman name, not a Jewish one. Simon explains there are clubs like this springing up everywhere. Simon doesn't call the meeting a get-together, but a town assembly. That sounds rather pretentious. You're wary at first. Is this some sort of pyramid scheme? Won't cost you a kondratis, he says. Not much you can buy for kondratis these days. You look dubious. Is this a club for Jews? Simon chuckles. Some of my fellows from the old country think it should be, but I don't. I'm the only Jewish member in Thessalonica, in fact. All the others are from the nations. He's promised you a free meal, so why not? And no harm in networking. You might pick up some new customers out of this. Tonight's town assembly is a special event, says Simon. We've just received a letter from Ambassador Paul. We're looking forward to hearing it. As you walk through the streets, you ask Simon a few questions about these people. Simon says the ambassador told them that if they accepted the God as their governor, they will live forever. That sounds cool. So what is this God's name? Well, he doesn't really have a name, says Simon. We just call him the name. That makes no sense. Are you guys atheists? The really important thing, says Simon, is God's son, Iosus. Oh, so God's son was a Greek, just like Apollo. No, chides Simon. Iosus was a Jew. His Hebrew name is Yeshua. Eosus died and then came back to life, says Simon. Okay, well, lots of people did that. Cyrus? How did Eosus die, you ask? A chariot accident? No, says Simon, he was crucified by the Romans. Crucified? Holy moly! Only the worst of the worst are crucified. How did Eosus deserve that? Simon glances at you. Some say he was killed because he raided the Bank of Judea. You raise your eyebrows. Judea has a bank? Simon grunts. We call it the temple. But he was really killed as part of the name's plan to save the world. You have no idea what he is talking about. You're surprised when you arrive at Aristarchus' home. He lives in a more upmarket part of town than you are used to. He can afford a separate room just for eating, for goodness sake. Aristarchus is reserved until you tell him you make leather awnings for a living. His eyes light up, just like the ambassador. The host welcomes you as a comrade to the governor's dinner. Comrade? Are these people communists? And who is the governor? Is Aristarchus talking about himself in the third person? The 10 of you fill the room. Not exactly the town assembly. The others fill you in about Eosus. Eosus has bought them all. Now hang on, these people don't look like slaves, you think. You know for a fact that Simon isn't a slave. At the end of the meal, Aristarchus asks everyone to participate in the Thanksgiving. They take this very seriously. He passes around some pita chips and a cup with the blood of Eosus. Okay, atheist, communist, vampires. Hang on. Simon, as a Jew, is forbidden to consume blood. He even gets his lamb chops from a special butcher. What's going on? Simon explains you are drinking red wine, not blood. Now is the highlight of the evening. The reading of Ambassador Paul's letter. You've had your fill and you just want to go home. But it would be ungracious to leave after your free feed, and it would certainly offend your friend Simon. Aristarchus opens the ambassador's letter and begins to read. Quote, 1 Thessalonians 1:1. Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy, to the town assembly of the Thessalonians in God the Father, and Governor Eosus the ointment. Grace to you and peace. We always give thanks to God for all of you and mention you in our prayers, constantly remembering before our God and Father your work of faith and labour of love and steadfastness, of hope in our governor Eosus the ointment. For we know, comrades beloved by God, that he has chosen you, because our message of the good news came to you not in word only, but also in power, and in the holy wind, and with full conviction. End quote. You stare at Simon. Paul said ointment and holy wind, like a big storm? Simon is irked. The ambassador meant anointed one, not ointment. And when the ambassador says wind, he really means spirit. The letter continues. Quote, 1 Thessalonians 1:9. For the people of those regions, report about us what kind of welcome we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols, to serve a living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Eosus, who rescues us from the wrath that is coming. End quote. Simon has a moment of pride. Everyone else in the room has worshipped idols, but not him. Jews have never worshipped idols. You are confused about that coming wrath thing. That's a downer. Simon quickly describes that amongst his people, many sages have written that the name will destroy the world soon. So much for we will all live forever. At that point, you say you really have to get back home. Simon pulls you back. The next part of Paul's letter goes off on a crazy tangent. Quote, 1 Thessalonians 4:1. Finally, comrades, for you know what instructions we gave you. For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from selling your sexual purity, that each one of you know how to control your own body in holiness and honour, not with lustful passion, like the nations who do not know God, that no one wrong or exploit a brother in this matter, because the governor is an avenger in all these things. For God did not call us to impurity, but in holiness. Therefore, whoever rejects this, rejects not human authority, but God, who also gives his holy wind to you. End quote. This Paul bloke is obsessed with sex. Your sexual relations are your business, not the ambassador's. So if you join Ambassador Paul's so-called town assembly, the ambassador gets to dictate what to do in the bedroom? That sounds a little creepy. At this point, Aristarchus takes a break. He cracks open another amphora of wine. Thank Dionysus for that. About time. Simon's been agitated all evening. This letter is important to him. Paul, he says, told us that the name could ravage the whole world any week now. His son Eosus will become king of the whole world, and only those who accept Eosus as governor will survive and live forever under his godly rule. But Eosus hasn't arrived. Some of our town assembly have died since the ambassador came to us, so we don't really know what to think. We were all meant to live forever, not to be sent to Sheol. But I'm sure the ambassador's letter will clear it all up. You have little idea what he's talking about. When people die, they go to the underworld, or as Simon would put it, Sheol. End of story. Simon refuses to tell you even the name of his God, but he won't shut up about God's son Eosus. Aristarchus continues, quote, 1 Thessalonians 4:13. But we do not want you to be uninformed, comrades, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do, who have no hope. For since we believe that Eosus died and rose again, even so, through Eosus, God will bring with him those who have died. For this we declare to you by the word of the governor, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the governor, will by no means precede those who have died. For the governor himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in the ointment will rise first. End quote. The get-together applauds. The ambassador, says Aristarchus, tells us that our dead comrades will also live forever. This is great news. Simon is still perturbed. Eosus was meant to be here faster than an Amazon Prime delivery. What's the story? Aristarchus concludes, quote, 1 Thessalonians 5:1. Now concerning the times and the seasons, comrades, you do not need to have anything written to you. For you yourselves know very well that the day of the governor will come like a thief in the night. When they say there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them, as labour pains come upon a pregnant woman, and there will be no escape. End quote. Ambassador Paul has given himself an out, you think. The get-together thought that Eosus was returning any day now. But the ambassador says, who knows when? And that allusion to labour pains is a little odd. You leave the get-together with Simon, moving through the dark streets. See you tomorrow. Your Egyptian friend from the workshop has been pestering you for ages to join him after hours at the pub. Might take him up on that. The pub has a lot more beer than the get-together has wine, even if the dolmades are not so good. In this vignette, I have translated some Greek words in unfamiliar but legitimate ways to bring out how strange an early Christian meeting would have seemed. Paul called himself an apostolos, which to his contemporaries meant an ambassador or delegate. The Greek word ekklesia is invariably translated into English as church. To a Greek of the time, it meant town assembly. Christians called each other brother or sister, if they were feeling gender inclusive. To a Greek, that was odd and came across as comrade. The Thanksgiving we call the Eucharist, a word which means exactly that, thanksgiving. The title Lord Jesus Christ requires a lot of unpacking. In Paul's usual designation for Jesus, he uses the word kurios, translated into English as Lord. That's an inadequate translation. Kurios would only be translated as Lord in a Downton Abbey script. Paul's Greek contemporaries would have understood kurios as boss or master. Perhaps the best translation comes from British English. In British English, governor would precisely fit the bill. That term is one step more respectful than boss, one step less fawning than master, and 10 steps less craven than lord. If you have never heard the British word governor before, you should watch more Ray Winstone movies. Paul's use of Christos, Christ, which I have rendered as ointment, is puzzling. The standard translation into English is the anointed, a translation of a Hebrew word of the same meaning. Throughout the Middle East of antiquity, kings were anointed with olive oil on the forehead. The Hittites did it. All of Israel and Judah's neighbours did it. In Jewish tradition, the term the anointed was applied to a few especially favoured by God, such as the Persian king Cyrus the Great, who released the Jews from their exile in Babylon. Few Greeks and Romans of Paul's day would have been aware of this history. Perhaps few Jews would have. But the uncommon Greek word Christos does not mean the anointed. All pagan authors use Christos to mean the ointment smeared, not the person being smeared. The Septuagint, the Hellenistic Greek translation of the Hebrew Tanakh, usually uses the word al-ipho to translate Messiah, anointed one. How did Christos, ointment, come to mean anointed one, with its allusions to half-forgotten Jewish traditions? We have no idea. Surprisingly, few scholars have speculated on the transition. The term is unlikely to have originated with Paul. He confidently uses it in his earliest letter. His followers already know he means anointed one and not ointment. The only conclusion we can make is that Christos was used as a description of Jesus within a few years of his death. Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians is universally regarded as not only the earliest of Paul's surviving letters, but the very earliest document attesting to Christianity. The letter was written sometime between 45 and 52, maybe 20 years before the first Gospel, the Gospel of Mark. It just goes to show that sometimes professors can agree with each other. The letter shows us Paul the missionary in action. According to the book of Acts, Paul had been darting around the eastern Mediterranean, founding Jesus fan clubs wherever he went. This earliest of documents shows us the dynamics of Christian missionary work. Paul established Jesus clubs on his first swing through Greece, a few years before the letter was written. According to Acts, Paul and his friends, Silas and Timothy, had travelled to Thessalonica to establish a new Jesus fan club. As usual, Paul had preached to Jews in the synagogue first, before preaching to the nations. That did not work out so well. Quote, Acts 17:1. Paul and Silas came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews, and Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days argued with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and to rise from the dead. Some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews became jealous, and they formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. End quote. Paul speedily decamped for friendlier locales. Most Jews would have regarded him as a lunatic. The Jewish scriptures barely mention a Messiah. No Old Testament passage says that a Messiah must suffer, and certainly no passage says that he will come back from the dead. To Jews, Paul was speaking nonsense. According to Acts, Paul follows the same pattern over and over. He preaches first to the Jews, is rejected, and only then preaches to the nations. 1 Thessalonians says nothing about preaching to Jews. Paul's Jesus Club is full of people who worship idols, Greeks. There are many conflicts between the book of Acts and Paul's own accounts in his letters. I'll get to that in a later episode. Stewing in Corinth, or perhaps Athens, Paul is anxious about his Thessalonian club. The town is only a few days away, but Paul dares not go back. He dispatches his mate Timothy to suss things out. Timothy reports back that the club is doing fine, but its members have some questions. And so Paul replies with the first letter to the Thessalonians. The letter shows us a confident writer. This can't be the first letter Paul has written, but we have no earlier ones, all gone. 1 Thessalonians is unusual amongst Paul's letters. In all his later letters, Paul admonishes and chastises his clubs. They have been beguiled by other missionaries whom Paul objects to. They believe the wrong things. Paul is perpetually cranky in all his other letters. Paul is forever trying to put out bushfires in his clubs, mediating relations between the Jews and the Gentiles who want to join up. The Jewish club members say that an entry requirement is to follow kosher. The Gentile members will have none of that. Paul weaves between the two. In this letter, Paul has not a bad word to say about his club. He loves the Thessalonians. He has no bushfire to extinguish, no opponent to quash. 1 Thessalonians is devoid of Paul's later theology. According to Protestants, Paul argues that the only path to salvation is by belief in Jesus, by faith. They interpret Paul as attacking both hidebound Jewish legalism, where you achieve God's love simply by sticking to the rules, and the Catholic and Orthodox notions that you can achieve salvation by atoning for your wickedness with good deeds. None of this is in 1 Thessalonians. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul is trying to convince his Greek audience that some Jew executed decades ago has been raised from the dead. He will become king of the Jews. Not only that, he will become king of all the nations. Greeks should become the loyal followers of Jesus and the loyal followers of the God of the Jews, precisely because the God of Israel had raised Jesus from the dead. You must, says Paul, reject useless statues and idols. There is only one living God, the God of the Jews. The letter tackles an urgent question asked by the Thessalonians. Paul had said no one would die before the return of Jesus. Wrong. Some club members have died. Paul gives an answer that many modern Christians would find unexpected, if not unnerving. Modern Christians believe that as soon as you die, you go to Jesus in heaven. Paul does not believe that in this letter. Paul knows nothing about a post-mortem existence with Jesus in heaven. There is no afterlife. The dead are not in heaven. They are nowhere. They do not exist. Paul only knows that at some time in the future, the dead will resurrect and return in triumph with Jesus. Paul has to correct the Thessalonians' expectations. Sure, some people have died, but don't worry. Everyone gets to go to the party, to live forever, even if they are dead. 1 Thessalonians is the most apocalyptic of Paul's letters. He expects the end at any moment and enjoins his club to prepare for it. God will destroy the world soon, any day now. Paul has no doubt that Jesus will return before Paul dies. What does it matter where the dead are now? They will return soon enough. All you have to do is accept Jesus as your master. When the world ends, you will be saved. Paul's discourse on sex in 1 Thessalonians is but the first of many in his letters. We all know about traditional family values. Now, here's a surprise. Paul rejects the whole idea of family values. Abolish families. Don't get married. Don't have sex. Jesus is coming soon, so what is the point? Be chaste. If you are so utterly depraved that you must have sex, then do so only in marriage. But that is a last resort. Paul does not approve of sex. He wants you to be celibate. Paul is determined that his club refrain from loathsome Greek practices. Prime amongst these are deviant sexual practices, for which he uses the Greek word porneia. Paul takes the standard Jewish view of the time. No adultery, no masturbation, no oral sex, no gays, and no women on top. These are disgusting Greek practices. We won't have any of that. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul has nothing to say to women. He talks only to men. He only uses the word adelphoi, brothers. Many modern translations turn that into brothers and sisters. But it is by no means clear if Paul included women in his Thessalonian club. He is deeply concerned about men straying. He says that when men stray, they betray their brothers. If a man has sex with someone not his wife, he robs another man of his property rights. It could be the woman's father. It could be the woman's husband or the woman's brother. The injury is to a man, never a woman. What does this letter tell us about earliest Christianity? First, that this was a sect that actively recruited members far afield from its birthplace in Judea. Even though Jesus was Jewish and Paul is Jewish, Paul is recruiting from pagans. And he wants these pagans to worship the national God of the Jews. Paul's teaching is apocalyptic. Paul was mining the rich Jewish tradition of apocalyptic literature. For a quick refresher about that, check out my episode 2.9, The Apocalypse to End Them All, 1st Enoch. Greeks and Romans had no religions or philosophical concept anything like that the world would end. Almost everyone agreed that the world is eternal. The letter is notable also for what it does not tell us. Paul refers to his friends Silvanus and Timothy. He does not mention his contemporaries Peter, James the Just, or the other disciples. Paul does not quote from Jesus in the letter. In all of his letters, Paul quotes Jesus a tiny 3 times. We learn almost nothing about Jesus from Paul's letters. Paul says nothing about Jesus' birth and little of his mission. You would not know that Jesus was a teacher, a healer, and a worker of miracles. You would not know about Jesus' parents, John the Baptist, and the many other characters portrayed in the Gospels. Paul has no interest in Jesus' life. Paul only wants to tell us about Jesus' resurrection and its implications for the world. What does Paul know about the life of Jesus? Paul says that Jesus was a descendant of David, that he had a brother called James, and he had a following. Jesus established a bread and wine ritual for his followers as a memorial to himself. Jesus was betrayed. On the instigation of the Jews, he was killed by crucifixion. Jesus was buried and rose from the dead, after which many people saw him. And that is all Paul knows about the life of Jesus. You could write out that on a post-it note. I'd like to thank Professor Dale Martin at Yale University for inspiring this episode. So thanks, Dale, and keep up the good work. In the next episode of the History in the Bible, I explore the pagan and Christian sources we have for the life of Jesus. Thanks for listening. For maps, charts, and diagrams, check out my website, www.historyinthebible.com.